All right. Welcome, everyone, to Deprogrammed on Unsafe Space. I am your co-host, Carter Laren, and I am joined by, as always, the bad mama jamma, Keri Smith. Keri.
Hi, Carter. Hi, guys.
Oh, wait, let me make sure they can see you, too. There we go.
Okay.
I guess I should do the follow us stuff. We're at Unsafe Space on Twitter. Follow us there. Thank you guys. You helped us get over our first kind of major milestone on YouTube was 500 followers. Our next goal is 1,000. So thank you guys. You helped get us there. So, and Keri, I think you tweeted out. So it was your peeps that helped get us there.
Yay. I'm pretty excited. These little milestones are the most important ones. So I'm going to celebrate all of them. I got excited when we got negative comments.
Yeah. So we've spent the last, I feel like we've interviewed feminists for the last 3 weeks in a row, and I'm kind of tired of it as much as they were all great. So maybe we need to get some, some burly men in to talk about guy stuff. Huh. But in the meantime,
interesting.
Yeah, I'm just, not that I don't love the women, but there's been too many feminists. I want to maybe get men's rights people in, but regardless, Keri and I, we kind of feel like we just need to get caught up with each other and with the audience, because there's been a lot of stuff going on in the news. Also, like lots of weird threads on Twitter and Facebook, and people complaining about stuff or stuff people want to talk about. So this is just kind of a show where we're gonna take a break from, interviewing feminists and rant. And Keri's gonna rant a little bit. So, hey, yeah. Lou is the first and probably only monetary supporter of the show at this point. So, Lou, you can just suggest any topics, and we're basically your slaves because you own us. But So, Keri, I don't want to tell you what you have to rant about, but on our list here, the first thing is Kyle Korver's. I don't even know if that's how I don't follow basketball. I assume that's how you say his name. Kyle Korver's white privilege article. Would you like to? Do you have anything to say about it? You want to tell people what this was and maybe launch into a rant?
I might be ranted out because I was ranting yesterday, but yeah. Kyle Korver is, I wasn't familiar with him beforehand either, a white basketball player who wrote this essay that all of the elite SJWs and the blue checkmark journalists are all excited about. And everyone is talking about it like it's this amazing piece of writing. It's called Privileged. And
anything a white guy writes that where he's guilty of shit is an amazing piece of writing.
It's an amazing piece of writing, yes. And so it's basically, I think it's the equivalent. I said, it's basically the equivalent of in a Baptist church, like during the benediction, when a non-believer walks down the aisle and then confesses all their sins and accepts Jesus into their heart, except what he's confessing is his privilege. And in this religion, in SJW religion, there is no God, there is no grace, there's no redemption. That's really, I think it's like that moment where, and all the congregations all excited. That's all the other SJWs all excited, like, welcome into the fold. We've got another one.
You used this analogy yesterday, and I didn't think of it at the time, but I grew up in a Baptist church, partly until my father started his own cult. That's
a story for another day.
That's a story for my therapist. I remember being it was one of those Baptist church where they get up out of the aisle and dance and kind of go crazy. And I remember I was a runner back when I weighed half as much as I do now. I ran a lot. And I had hurt my ankle. And I remember I was in either late junior high or early high school. And I remember the pressure of they were claiming they could do healings. That it was that kind of Baptist church, right? So that the preacher would lay his hands on you and anoint you with oil and heal you. And people were going up to the front getting healed. And I remember feeling so much pressure to go up and get healed and then pretend like it worked, because everyone really like believed that and wanted that, and I would get so much like credit for being a good person and being a believer, and God must love me if this was happening. And I did. I remember like I like hobbled up on crutches, and the guy like put his oil on my ankle, and I remember like walking back without crutches, and I remember my just trying to shut off the pain centers in my brain so that I could like make it back and look like everything was fine. It was horrible. It was a horrible experience. I'm scarred for life. And so
that it is anyone, it's that social pressure.
Yeah, it is. Anyway, I didn't mean to divert. I did. I meant to tell a little story because it's just a fun day. Tell people about this article that Kyle Korver tell me about his redemption.
Well, and I'm sorry, as you know, I'm a little distracted because I do have a lot of dogs here today, and we're going to figure this out in the future where I can put them where they won't disrupt us. But right now I'm like, I've got a bunch of treats here and I'm listening, and I'm also trying to keep them quiet. So I apologize, guys. And my neighbors,
that's all right.
They're doing something outside, which has all of them really like, they're all like wandering around trying to see what's happening. So Kyle Korver.
Well, the title of the article is Privileged. Let's start with that.
Let's start there. It's just the basic white man coming into the SJW fold piece. I've seen countless SJW conversions. It really is like a religious conversion. So what he's done now is basically said, I recognize my white privilege. And what I find interesting about these pieces when somebody comes into the fold is I've always looked to see what are the practical things that they think they can do about this so-called privilege, so what are they advocating doing? Because most of the time, all they're doing is just confessing it and talking about it. And now, hey, I'm one of the good guys, right? It's just a virtue signaling thing. But at the end of his essay, he did have a few things, and it's the standard things. It's like, and now my job is to listen to the marginalized people.
Shut up. I think that was the conclusion.
Is to shut up and listen to the and to make space. Make space for the marginalized people. And I think this ideology is about control. We've talked about this before. And so now that he's in the fold, here's what's going to happen. Now you're always beholden to the mob. Okay. This is why I don't like Beto. Beto from Texas, is running for president. He's such a slimy little he's like an empty vessel. And I think we should start
calling him Beta, because that's how I view him.
Yes, Beta. But he's just this little slimy, empty shell, and SJWism has been pumped inside of him. And so now he's beholden to it. That's why I don't trust. He's always going to be beholden to that ideology. So when they demand that you apologize, you apologize. Like they own you now. They own you now. And you're now, if the mob comes for you, you're going to have to bend the knee and kiss the ring every time. You're going to start filtering all of your thoughts and actions through this ideology. It is like a cult. Like you're going to be self-censoring from now on. So
can we just, I want to actually dig into something that he said in his article, but also I want to just be clear. He cited two examples of racism as justification for his shift in thinking. But both of them were not examples of racism. And the first one was his teammates getting arrested, and the second one was an interaction with a fan. So can you know these stories well? I mean, I can try and go through them, but
so one of them was outside of a club in the wee hours of the morning. A different basketball player and his girlfriend got into some altercation, and then some random dude and his friend started fighting with them and ended up cutting them, like stabbing them. And when the cops came, and then they basically were like, they, declared this part's a crime scene. And this friends of Kyle Korver, two other basketball players were there, one black, one white. So the black guy, they both get arrested. They both get put in handcuffs. The black guy, because they won't leave the crime scene. The cops wrestle him to the ground, and in the course of wrestling him to the ground, because he's resisting arrest.
He resists getting arrested. Yeah.
Right. So he breaks part of his ankle or something. And he ended up suing and won a lot of money for it, which fine. If the jury found that the cops were in the wrong on that, great. It's up to a jury to decide. But what Kyle Korver took from this was that that if he had been there as a white guy, he wouldn't have been arrested. I'm like, this is another one of those things where I'm like, wait, we don't have to imagine what would have happened because there was a white basketball player there and he was arrested.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
It's total just fantasy world of like, well, I know that it wouldn't have happened to me. I'm like, no, it would have we know that it would have happened to you.
It's not because of his race.
Wow, Corver, you're a piece of shit, twice as tall as me probably, but you're full of shit.
Yeah.
Like
it's not because of his race. A black guy and a white guy got arrested. It's because they wouldn't listen to the cops' orders and leave the crime scene. So, and whether those cops were being overly aggressive or not, again, to say it had something to do with race, I think is wrong. And so, but he says it has to do with race. So the second thing he said had to do with race was this interaction of another teammate of his who was black with a fan. Do you want to talk about that one? Because that one also I thought was kind of interesting, although you don't have to. Well, yeah, that one I looked up because I want to know what I'm talking about, right? So I looked that one up too.
Well, that makes you not social justice right away. Well, that's the problem with you, Keri.
That's the new Keri insists on looking things up. It was much easier when I was SJW. I was just like, what do I think about this? Oh, okay, yeah. That's what I think. So I looked that one up, and it was a black basketball player who apparently has a history of getting into arguments with fans, and the most recent argument was a few weeks ago or something. And he said he basically was threatening this fan and his wife, a white guy and his wife, saying, he's going to mess them both up or whatever. That part was caught on camera. What wasn't caught on camera was what the fan was saying to him beforehand. Well, and he says it was race-based. He says it was that the white fan said something about get on your knees again or something like that, or take a knee again. I don't know, but I don't understand how that, even if that's what the fan said, I don't understand how that's race-based. But the fan says he wasn't saying. The fan said no, he was wearing, in the video you can see he's wearing these like what looks like ice packs on his knees, and the fan said he was yelling like, sit down and take a go ice your knee, taunting him. But
his knees were hurt.
Right. And he said,
go take care of your injuries. Stop arguing with me. Yeah.
Right. And that the player yelled back at him, which I think is funny if this actually happened, that it wasn't ice packs. It was something heat related, which in the middle of an altercation, I don't know if that even sounds plausible. That you didn't say that it's not ice packs. It's a heat pad. But so anyway, this again seems something that's blown out of proportion. If that fan was yelling something racial, which we don't know if he was or not, that's awful. And that's horrible. Sure. But I don't understand how that's evidence of this privilege that he's talking about, like that necessitates this kind of conversion, that necessitates a belief that the entire society is structured, tilted towards white supremacy, which is what this belief system alleges. Yeah. And so it's like, yeah, there are racists out there, and yes, racism exists, and yes, some systems are still racist. I absolutely agree. But to think that these two things that he mentioned are the catalyst for him converting, I'm like, it's really one of those social pressure things. I believe.
No, absolutely, I agree with you. Something else he said that struck me, because I tend to try and look at the philosophical or moral statements people are making, because people try and sound intellectual about things, especially like social justice warriors love to like redefine terms and kind of introduce us to things that are redefine terms in a way that fits their agenda. So he actually writes, you can see he's trying to do this in a way that will convince average people who really like aren't thinking too deeply about it. But so he just states some things. So he says, as white people, are we guilty of the sins of our forefathers? So he says, let me back up. He says that we need to start differentiating between guilt and responsibility, right? And if you don't think about that, it's like, okay, those are two different words. So then you follow his argument. And he says, well, as white people, are we guilty of the sins of our forefathers? No, I don't think so. So he's reeling you in a little bit. Okay, yeah, we agree. We're not guilty of the sins of our forefathers, right? But are we responsible for them? Yes, I believe we are, he says. So I want to clarify a few things. go to the dictionary. That's all I did. Look up the word responsible, right? All of the definitions assume that it's something that is in your control, over which you have power. So the first one, answerable or accountable, as for something within one's power, control, or management, right? So this is the whole idea that, you know, there's even a phrase, you can't have, it's responsibility without authority or whatever it is, or like, I forget, there's some like something people complain about in management. I forget what it is, but it's like when they're making you responsible for something without giving you the ability to actually affect it, that's considered wrong, because you can't be responsible for something that you don't have the power over. So all the definitions in the dictionary are about, they all have this concept of you have power over it. So you can't be responsible for something over which you don't have power, like what ancestors did.
Yeah,
right?
but this is why they've redefined power, you know? Like,
well, but I don't think their definition of power fixes this problem, right? Like, I don't have power over what my ancestors did, even by their definition of power. I don't have control, right? I don't have control over what happened.
But see, they would say, right, as a result of what supposedly your ancestors did, that you do have power, that you have systemic power. That would be their answer. That you know,
right? But that's an equivocation, right? So so in the context of power here, I'm talking about control over the behavior that was wrong, right? So
I agree.
I may have benefits from it, but it's an equivocation to say, well, you have power as a result. Like, power as a result of it is different from power to have changed it, right? And guilt comes from guilt is. So again, I also looked up guilt just to be clear. But coincidentally enough, one of the definitions of guilt actually uses the word responsibility, a feeling of responsibility or remorse for some offense. So you have to have responsibility in order to feel guilt. I mean, you can feel unearned guilt even if you weren't responsible, which this white basketball player is really good at. But you have to have control to assume responsibility, and we don't have control. And frankly, only 4% of the population were slave owners in the first place. When America was founded. So most of these white people are not descendants of slave owners. And a lot of them are descendants of abolitionists. So they're not responsible for anything. Even if you could trace back responsibility to previous generations. It's a nasty little trick that he's trying to do, where it's like, don't worry, I'm not asking you to feel guilty, but I am asking you to be responsible for. And I think one of the problems with white culture is, you know, I don't know what it is. Maybe Jewish people do this as well, because there's a lot of guilt in Judaism and Christianity, but like, stop feeling unearned guilt. You're guilty for your own actions. You're responsible for your own actions. You are not responsible for or guilty for anything anyone related to you did. Like, none of your ancestors, you're not responsible. Your father could have been Hitler. You're not responsible. It's not your fault. And you don't owe anything to anyone else because of it. So this is it's a vile perspective. And, you know, this guy, Kyle Korver, is playing into the problem. He's creating the problem, and he's using his platform as a, I guess, famous white basketball player to try and get other white people to feel guilty that some highly paid basketball players got into an argument with a fan, or that some guy resisted arrest and therefore got injured and then got monetary compensation from the cops for aggressive or excessive use of force.
Yeah.
It's your day to rant. Sorry.
No, I love that rant. I think you're right. It is about guilt. And it's funny because SJWs will say it's not about guilt. They actually are of the opinion. I like when I'm talking to like a new convert and they're sort of trying to explain these redefinitions to me that I preached 20 years ago. I know the redefinition. I understand it. I just reject it. Right. But they try to, maybe you don't understand. Let me tell you again, racism equals, prejudice plus power. But when I talk to these new SJWs, sometimes they'll say, well, recognizing your white privilege doesn't mean you have to feel guilty. And it's like, because they assume that everyone feels guilty. I'm like, no, I don't feel guilty. I mean, that's how, there's sort of like, actually sometimes they say your guilt is standing in the way of you recognizing your privilege. Like, get past your guilt. I'm like, yeah, I don't.
But they don't want you to actually get past your guilt, because they want you to shell out money and resources because you're guilty. Right. I mean, so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Is there more to your rant? Because I'm going to go on a tangent. Okay, you're muted because your dogs are enjoying themselves. So actually this morning at the breakfast table, I was talking to my daughter, and she was talking about slavery because her teacher's reading a book about slavery. And we started to talk about slavery, and I said to her, well, actually, there's still slavery that exists today. And she said, what? And I said, well, yeah, in Libya, there's open air slave trading happening. And last I heard about it, for $400, you could buy someone. And she was, of course, appalled, as she should be, by this. But then we got into a discussion about slavery generally. And we talked about the Muslim slave trade, which was much bigger than the European slave trade. And we talked about the history of slavery, and we talked about slavery being the norm. I mean, it's mentioned in the Bible. It's the norm for human society for thousands of years. There's been slavery, and she asked a really, I thought, potent question, and it broke my heart a little bit because obviously my daughter has white DNA. Mostly. She said, well, why are they focusing on white people being the slave? Why are they focusing on it being white people's fault? And I think that's a really good question. And it spawned this discussion of well, why are they focusing on white people? And I said, well, I'm not sure of this, but I think if you go to someone from the Middle East of Muslim descent who is descended from the ancestors of slave traders, and you try and convince them that they should feel guilty, or even, in Kyle's words, responsible for the oppression that their ancestors foisted and were committed against slaves, I think they'll laugh at you. I think they'll think you're ridiculous. And they won't shell. Right. They won't say, oh, you're right, we should have quotas and we should have reparations and blah, blah, blah. They won't say any of that. They'll laugh at you.
And we should shut up and make room and not talk.
Right. And my wife is Chinese. She grew up in China. And my daughter was saying, we were talking about that as well. And I said, go to anyone on her side of the family. Go to China and accuse them of something their ancestors did and try and get them to feel guilty or responsible for it. They will also laugh at you, right? There's something about Western culture, and I think there's some good things about feeling guilty and responsible, because it does make you, maybe be a little more introspective about your own behavior and actions. But there's something horribly destructive about the willingness to feel responsible for stuff that's not your fault. Whether or not there's a privilege of being, there's privilege for growing up rich. There's privilege. Growing up 7 feet tall so that you're more likely to be able to join the NBA. There's privilege in lots of the accidents of life and nature, depending on who you're born to and where being born in the U.S. is privilege for any color skin.
Absolute privilege. I got into a conversation about this yesterday, Carter, believe it or not. I get into a lot of these conversations, but this was as a result of someone we were talking about equity versus equality of opportunity. And I mean, I think that's at one point he gave an example that was I met this guy at my college or something who he had to struggle to get there. Whereas I was born into this upper middle class family and I didn't have the same struggle of arriving at that school. And And my answer to him is like, yes, that's life. Like every individual is privileged in some ways and marginalized in some ways. That's what life is. You're all going to suffer in some way. You're all going to be privileged in some way. You have different struggles. That's what life is about. The most you can do, I believe in inequality of opportunity. We should remove all legal barriers that prevent people from being equal in a society, which I think we've done. You know, I'm like, I don't know what more.
I think we've added some more that make some people more equal than others.
We actually have. We've added a few more, but that's the most you can do. Now, someone who believes in equity, who believes in equality of outcome, you know, he wasn't fully arguing for this, but he was basically saying, well, there are other barriers. There are social barriers and economic barriers, and that's true. But the government, it's not the government's job to fix social barriers. It's not the government's job to fix all, you know, the government. The most we can do is to make sure the laws treat everyone equally. And then if you start trying to impose, like lift these people up and push these people down, it becomes this really authoritarian country where you're going to like you said, you're going to be adding laws that actually make things unequal. It's like that Kurt Vonnegut short story, Harris and Bergeron, where the really talented dancers are weighted down with heavy weights because they don't want any dancer to be better than another dancer, you know, and the really attractive people have to wear masks because you don't want anyone to be more attractive than the next person. And so that short story is amazing. I know we've talked about it before because I think that's a story about equity, and that's equality of outcome. And by the way, why would you want to live in a place with equality of outcome? What's the point?
Well, and you can't, I mean, and the point of that story is you can't do it with, the only way to obtain equality of outcome is to cripple the people who are best at things. It reminds me, Yaron Brook, who used to be, he's a friend, not super close, but he used to be the president of the Ayn Rand Institute. And he goes on lecture tours a lot. And the way that he described it, his kind of shortened version of that Kurt Vonnegut story was, he used to say, well, there is a way, he's dating himself because he's going to talk about Michael Jordan, but I'm dating him. But he said, is a way to be equal to Michael Jordan in basketball, on the basketball court. Chop his legs off. Like, then we'll be equal. He might still beat me, but it'll be a lot closer, right?
Yeah.
And that's the truth of the matter. And some of it is environmental, but some of it is there's genetic differences between people who are born in different environments. Life isn't fair and life isn't equal. But that doesn't give you the right to violate someone else's rights because you feel like you're pissed off that you were born a certain way,
right,
or into a family or whatever.
And I think people forget that some of these struggles are I would say healthier than others. That guy had to struggle to get to college. I bet he really appreciates where he's at and what he's earned more than someone who didn't. I'm sure he learned things through that struggle. I know some of the most wealthy, like privileged people I know, like famous or with a certain amount of social power or what have you. They're some of the most miserable people I've ever been around. So that's a struggle, like misery and addiction and, self-hatred and all that. It's like, sure. which people never, I don't know. It's like, you're sort of saying, oh, wait, this person, you shouldn't have to do struggles where it's like, you have to work hard to get somewhere. Well, yeah, maybe we should. Maybe that's the right kind of struggle to have rather than sitting around like with nothing that requires hard work from you and then struggling with, mental problems or whatever.
Yeah, no, I mean, fundamentally, I think the whole idea of equality of outcome is just nihilism, because in nature, there is no equality of outcome. You can't actually do it without destroying the best. Like, you basically all have to be dead. When you're all dead, you're equal.
Yes.
Other than that, you're not equal, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just nihilism. There is no way to make outcomes equal unless you want to just have a giant thermonuclear war and we can all die, then we'll be equal. But that's about it.
Yeah. Well, what's that saying? They want us all to be equal in the rubble.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Bodies are all equal. I'll give them that. Right. But I don't know. So I think we've addressed the Kyle Korver thing. Yost says in the chat, says Dave Rubin used to say last year that he thought, quote, we were winning the culture war. He doesn't say this anymore. He seems to fear that we're close to dystopia. What's your view on this? I mean, that's a really tough question. Keri, before I rant on it, do you have any views on this?
It depends on the day you ask me. I mean, seriously, some days I'm like, oh, they're winning. And because things have gone so far, I mean, look at what's happening in the schools. That's what really concerns me, is what's happening in public schools, that they're programming these kids, they're indoctrinating them at a younger and younger age. It's happening in kindergarten now. It's not college anymore. It's kindergarten. So, I mean, I saw a case last week was where right before Thanksgiving, these parents were sent a notice that their kids, like from kindergarten through sixth grade or whatever, would be watching these films about picking your own gender, about transgenderism, and they had to opt out. But because it was sent right before Thanksgiving, the email, and it was buried way down in the email, a lot of parents didn't even see it. And then the ones who did see it and who opted out, a parent went there that day to see what was happening, and it didn't matter that they opted out. Their kids were watching the videos, kindergartners. So wow. That's happening in public schools. And there were a couple different stories that I saw like that this week, where it's just, I think parents are just starting to get a clue about what's going on. They're starting to come into contact with the ideology in one form or another. And because it's being packaged as inclusion and diversity, and it's being packaged as these, social justice, these really positive sounding things, you have to really look at it to see how nefarious it is. So I guess I'm rambling a bit here, but that is when I look at what's happening in the schools, that's what makes me feel pessimistic. However, when I look at what's happening in kind of this new punk rock culture, as Paul Joseph Watson calls it, but like this new kind of counterculture that's pushing back against it, that makes me feel positive. Like Generation Z, I've seen some statistics that say they're going to be the most conservative since the Greatest Generation. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's definitely, if it is, it's a response to what's going on right now and with the millennial culture. I do think the funniest humor, the best comedy that's happening right now is conservative, or it's people pushing back against the PC narrative. It's even look at Babylon Bee. I mean, it's so much funnier than The Onion. That's a Christian satire site, and they are killing it. But that makes sense, because the best comedy is always poking fun at the sacred cows. And so if you're living in a time where PC is the norm, then it's going to be the Christian and conservatives who are doing the best comedy. Whereas, if you're living in a really conservative time or place, then it's going to be the liberals who are doing the best. So that kind of stuff gives me hope, though, because there's some really funny kind of counterculture YouTubers and stuff that are becoming popular. Did that answer your question?
Well, it was Yost's question. I don't know if it answered his question. It answered my question about what you think about it. I'll say that I feel like a broken record talking about this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I mean, this isn't a new problem. This is a result of, look, we decided to have publicly funded education a long time ago. That was a bad move because it separates the consumer from the person who's paying the bill, right? Always a bad move, right? A horrible move. We decided public education, and we think, oh, it's okay. The government will just teach the 3 R's. That'll be great. Then we had really bad philosophers start preaching crap in philosophy departments in university. We ignored that. Then it leaked into other humanities. We ignored that. Then it leaked over into the whole university and into media and culture, and Walter Duranty spreading Soviet propaganda. We ignored that. Then it leaked into the high schools. We ignore that. Now finally it's in kindergartens, and we're like, oh, this is crap. Yeah. It's like, yeah, but you know what? if you want to feel responsible for something generational, your ancestors let this crap in. And like, I don't feel guilty for that because, like I said, I don't feel guilty for anything my ancestors did, and I'm not responsible for it. But, you know, this is the inevitable result of decades and decades, if not over a century, of bad anti-enlightenment philosophy that pushes group ideology over individualism, pushes the government as solution to things. And yeah, now you've got government schools where they're trying to convince kindergartners that sex changes are a good idea. And so I kind of feel like looking at everyone who's shocked by this, who didn't argue against the philosophy, and most of whom are dead, and kind of like, what the fuck did you expect? This is the result, right? Mm-hmm. And people were telling you for decades, this was the result. That's where we are. I am optimistic by Gen Z because I think there is a backlash, right? I think it's like, okay.
There's a backlash coming.
Yeah. The flip side is I also have my days where I'm not optimistic. There's I don't know if anyone if people are familiar with the term collapsitarian, but there's this guy that I just started following on Twitter who's a collapsitarian. He's not the first collapsitarian I've heard of, but I think it's starting to gain momentum. And basically it's this idea that like, yes, Western culture can be saved, but only after a massive collapse. It's going to get worse before it gets better. There's going to be a massive collapse. Save your ammo, move to Montana and start over. I mean, that's kind of the mindset. In fact, I don't know if we talked about this, Keri, but with the Yang Gang, something I noticed about, so some of the people that are in the Yang Gang are, pro, what's his name? Alan Yang, whatever his name is, the candidate.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, there's this guy running for president named Yang. I mean, I just learned about him. Andrew Yang.
Yeah. So he's got, I think it's Alan Yang. I'm not sure of his first name, but he one of his positions is universal basic income. He wants to give everyone $1,000 a month. And his argument is like, well, government prints money for big banks. They should print money for this. Now, obviously, the right response is they shouldn't be printing money for big banks either. But so he's like, okay, we'll just print money. And interestingly enough, I was wondering, I saw some people who I knew were not on board with UBI suddenly put on the Yang Gang hats and like have a bunch of Yang Gang memes on their accounts. And I was wondering what the hell was going on. And as it turns out, I investigated a little bit. There's a large percentage of the Yang Gang people who are basically collapsitarians, and they're just like, screw it. We're going to take the $1,000. We're going to vote for Yang. We're going to get him in office. We're going to take the $1,000 a month. And they said this explicitly. We're going to take the $1,000 a month and we're going to use it to buy ammo. And everything will collapse and we'll have more ammo than everyone else. And we'll just, we'll defend ourselves and, presumably build some libertarian-like society somewhere. So I don't know. I do waver between.
I think this is a really funny. Yeah. Well, I'm trying to figure out the Yang thing too. And after you told me that, I have a friend who is a part of the Yang Gang, I guess, online. And I was like, are you supporting him ironically? Like, because that's what I heard. And he's like, no, like I really support. And he gave me some stuff to read. So I've got to do some more research on this dude. Yeah. But
of course, some people do support him, legitimately. Yeah. But I think even a lot of the people that are pretending to support him legitimately, probably maybe not your friend, but a lot of them are they're not going to admit it, right? You see it at the beginning, and they talk about it on 4chan, and then from then on, I've seen them I've seen this guy that I know, who I know is supporting him, like if you want to call that ironically, but like from a collapsitarian perspective, I see him interact with people online, and he just makes arguments for why UBI is a good idea. Like he just, he
doesn't do it with irony. That's really funny.
No, he just supports whatever Yang says. He's like, this is totally right. Right.
What an interesting time we're living in.
It is weird. Right. I don't know. Should I be depressed? I guess ultimately my answer is the same as yours. Depends on the day.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's more people. Somebody asked me on Twitter yesterday, one of our listeners, Jane, was like, what do we do? Like, what can we do? I know people have asked that about the podcast before. It's all well and good that you and I sit here and try to untangle it and explain what it is, but what can we do? And my simple answer to that is, I mean, you have to speak. You can't let them silence you. You have to speak, and you have to tell people what this belief system really is. That's why I'm doing this. That's why you're doing this. And if you can't, because you have a legitimate fear, if you have a job or something you have to protect, then support the people who are speaking. Support the people who are out there without that fear, or for whatever reason feel like I have the ability to do this. I'm going to do this. I was giving money to Peterson for over a year, per month. There's just a little bit, but it means something. So you can contribute, I think, even if you're not able to use your voice at this time for whatever reason. But there are more people every day using that voice, and that makes me feel good. Like, there are more YouTubers that I follow. There are more people who are doing their own type of journalism, like Tim Pool. There are people out there who every day there are more of them, I guess I'll put it that way. So I feel like it's from that perspective, it's getting better. That's also why the social media giants are trying to clamp down on free speech, is because all these people are gaining followings. And so they're shadow banning, they're censoring, they're demonetizing. And, Google is messing with search algorithms to determine what you get to see and what you don't. So they recognize the threat of this kind of new media as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I would argue the thing to do about it, and I've made this argument before, but the thing to do about it is do what we're doing, right? It's to talk about it. It's to arm people with the analysis that unravels this stuff and reveals it to be the crap that it is and the nihilism that it is underneath, and to change the culture around you, right? Just a few people around you. Like, we're trying to do this online to hopefully reach more people as we grow. But, we're having this discussion partly because, and actually we know this has happened from this discussion. We've had people reach out to us and say, hey, you've explained this. Now I'm like arguing with people in my life about it and like standing up for this stuff. And so, it's about having these discussions. It's not about politics. It's about culture. I mean, ultimately it's about philosophy,
I agree.
but it's really about culture. There's the Andrew Breitbart, politics is downstream of culture. I think of it, there's a different way that I kind of think about it. I tend to think of politics, a political system, as an emergent property of a culture. So this is why, even though I'm an anarcho-capitalist and I believe there should be no government eventually, I don't think that abolishing the government tomorrow is a good idea, because the culture would a worse government would emerge from the culture, because our culture is not supportive of the non-aggression principle generally. And so the more we can start moving culture towards this idea of individualism and a return to the kind of ideas of the Enlightenment, and push back against this groupthink and collectivism, the better. And you can do that just through arguing with people. You can do that through, when you read this article, if you follow basketball and you've got basketball buddies and someone says, hey, did you read Kyle Korver's article? You can push back just by saying, what a piece of shit. And maybe they won't even argue with you after that. Because a lot of people, they expect you to not have an opinion or to have the kind of generic opinion. And sometimes all you have to do is say, I don't agree. That sucks. And like, it jars them. They're like, what?
Yeah, because they're not used to, if they're in this cult, or if they're if they're in a city where it's predominant, like I am in Austin, they're not used to people having a different opinion. So you don't have to say it with so much force. I don't think you can call him a piece of shit. I'm kidding. But I get what you're saying.
The more force you say it with, the more impactful it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had this happen recently in my real life where I say real life, meaning not online, not on video, but this friend was talking, she designs clothes, and she had this really beautiful top, and I said something about the top, and she was like, oh, I know, I hope it's not, people don't view it as culturally appropriating, because I guess I had some Native American elements to it in the design, and I was just like, that's a load of nonsense, you know. And it was just startled her, because everyone accepts that cultural appropriation is a thing, right? No. So you definitely can have those moments with people where you just kind of have a different opinion, and I think you can do so forcefully or kind of subtly, or yeah.
Right. But, you know, whatever you do, if you push back, it will matter. And if you have kids, I don't believe in indoctrinating kids for any particular thing. So like, I'm an atheist. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. My daughter, we've had plenty of conversations. If she wants to go to church, or she wants to, be religious, that's fine. If she wants to be a socialist, that's fine. And sometimes I check in with her and just like reassure her that she can think differently from me, and that's okay. Now she doesn't, probably because she knows how I'm sure I still have an influence on her. I'm not saying that she doesn't, react to what her dad's morals are, but her grandparents have a very different set of beliefs. And when there's a conflict, I don't tell her like I'm right or they're stupid. I just say like, oh, well, ask them about it. And what do you think? And, you know what I think about this. What do you think about it? Ask them. Or could they be right about this? Could I be wrong about that? And I think ultimately, teaching your kids to think critically and independently and push back on narratives, and not put people up on a pedestal. Like my daughter no longer thinks that just because you're a teacher, you're right. And she sees through a lot of stuff, and it's not because she's smarter than other people. It's because she's been taught to use her own brain, and she'll call me out on crap sometimes. We all make mistakes and do stuff, and you gotta, instead of doubling down and being like, because I said so, or because I'm the parent, if you get caught, you gotta be like, yeah, you won that argument. You can have your ice cream, right? That was
you're modeling behavior there. Yeah. Right. Okay.
I lost.
Touche. Fair point.
Yeah. So that's something you can do, I guess.
Let's do more ranting. What else were we going to rant about?
Next on my list isn't really a rant, but it is, and I definitely want to get to Julian. There's so much shit I want to get to today. The next one's just like I should be short. There's been some pushback of like people saying, why did you have Meghan Murphy on the show? She's a Marxist, blah, 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 blah. And some kind of snarky comments like, oh, I don't like pizza, you don't like tacos. Let's go out for steak. That's the mindset, right? Look.
Somebody said that?
Yeah. Look, first of all, we didn't have Meghan Murphy on the show to talk about Marxism. If we had, it would have been a debate.
And we might still do that, because I think that would be very interesting. I would like
to. Right, we might, but then it will be a debate, right? But primarily, look, Keri and I don't even agree on everything. In fact, Keri and I don't agree on some fundamental things, like God, right? So, like, if I was going to have a show where I only talked to people who 100% agreed with me, and Keri was only going to have a show with people who 100% agreed with her, we wouldn't have a show. There would be no one to talk to. So we talk to people about specific topics that we're interested in, and when we think they have something to add. And so I think Meghan Murphy had something to add on trans activism from the perspective of how it affects women. And she had something to add about censorship because she's experienced it. So
I didn't see these comments. Were they were coming from like a conservative, maybe?
Yeah, there was some from conservatives. There were some comments from a socialist who was mad that we had her on because they were they were an intersectionalist, and they were mad that she was a quote. We had some of that as well.
Well, I'm shocked there are intersectionalist SJWs watching us. But I'm happy. I hope they watched.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Yeah, but they were pissed off about that. But my point is, I don't think the truth is fragile. So I'm not afraid of a Marxist coming on and saying like, I don't know, from each according to his ability and to each according to his need, and like suddenly feeling like, oh my God, they just undermined my entire position and people will be convinced. Like, that's a crappy, unconvincing argument, and I can push back on it. And like, I'm not afraid to have
Yeah.
other arguments on the show.
That's
So,
that's the whole thing about this. I'm sorry to cut you off, but you're just making me think about that's the whole reason I left SJWism, is so that because that's
right,
a conformist ideology. You can only have the acceptable opinions, right?
right.
And
Yeah,
so it's almost like when I saw people get mad at Jordan Peterson because he tweeted what he tweeted about Kavanaugh. I don't know if people followed this, but basically he said he was answering a question that one of the Weinsteins asked, which was, how do we heal this country? It was during the Kavanaugh thing. And he was thinking out loud on Twitter and was like, maybe if he gets confirmed for the nomination, he should step down. And I completely disagreed with that. And I know a lot of people who did, and he ended up writing more about it. And I think, was like, I was offering thoughts, which I may or may not agree with, like a thinking about something. I forget the way he said it, but it's not necessarily a prescription. It's just kind of laying that out. I'm not telling you this is what has to happen, right? But so I saw a lot of people turn on him then, are like, I'm not a Peterson fan anymore. And like Owen Benjamin, for example, who I also watch, took that really hard. But I couldn't understand that, because I'm like, I thought the whole reason, if you like Peterson, don't you like, the whole point is that we should be able to have different opinions on things. We're not always going to agree, even on big things. So
yeah, and you like Peterson for certain things, right? Like Peterson's not a philosopher. I don't think he is a good philosopher. I don't think he's a great philosopher, but he's a decent, obviously, clinical psychology. He understands well, and he's got an interesting perspective on religion and and culture, and he's got some good things to say there. And I just don't agree with him about a bunch of stuff. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't have him on. He wants to come on the show and talk about lobsters. I'm all for it, right?
I'd love to have him.
He has some great things to say about a lot of topics. And so
I adore Meghan Murphy as well. So I don't know if that's going to piss off some conservatives, but whatever. I also adore several people who you would call conservative. So it doesn't, I don't know. Anyway, that's a weird criticism. But you know what? I am excited that we have viewers that are so different. I was afraid that we might just have like one type of.
Well, I don't want an echo chamber, because if we're just sitting in an echo chamber talking to each other about how like crappy social justice is, I mean, I guess that can expand to other people who think social justice is crappy, but like we need to pull people in and have them hear arguments they haven't heard before, and have people who are like, oh, I'm listening because I'm also a trans exclusionary radical feminist, and maybe they happen to listen someday when we talk about Marxism and say something that they're like, oh, gee, I hadn't thought.
I don't think anybody identifies as a TERF, by the way. I think it's something put on people, but yeah, that's really funny. Okay.
Excuse me, I'm a little bit sick. So that was that one. I don't know if anyone has opinions on stuff that they want us to talk about. Tell us in chat. I got a list of some things. Okay. Mueller. I had a thread about God and morality with conservative millennial Allie Beth Stuckley. We had an argument on Twitter. There's some Ilhan Omar stuff. There's the Liberty Bill in Texas. There's a Candace Owens thing. And I want to talk about Julian Assange. So now that we're an hour in, there's like a shit ton of stuff. What do you want to talk about, Keri?
Well, I thought Candace Owens, no matter what you think about her, here's another great example. I don't care if you like her or not. I thought she did a great job in front of in Congress. Was it yesterday or the day before, during the hearing, where it was a hearing on white supremacy, and she basically said a few things which I think she was like, she read off some stats. She's like, I don't know any adult who can reasonably make the argument that we are living in a more racist time now than we were in the 60s. Like, she was talking about her grandfather's time. And I was saying the same thing in a conversation with a friend the other day who was talking about, as a lesbian, every day I wake up and face discrimination, and my people, my people. I'm like, but really, like you're not
sleeping with a bigot. Why did she face discrimination?
Right, and fighting for my very lives, like that kind of language that SJWs use, like fighting for our very lives. I'm like, you know what? It's objectively less. it's not as hard for gays and lesbians today as it was 10 years ago, as it was 20 years ago, as it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Things are getting better, okay? But the left, the SJW left, has done a good job of terrifying people and making them feel like they're under this threat. And so whether that's because they're Black or because they're gay, a lot of that happened in the ramp up to the 2016 election. This whole thing about, if Trump gets elected, he's going to put everybody in camps, and it's going to be, you're going to be living in this nightmare world, and nobody's living in that nightmarescape. I'm sorry, it's not that. Right. You've been the people that believe that. I actually feel really bad for them, because I feel like that's the responsibility. That's on the media. That's on the media, and it's on SJWs for convincing people that they're living in this dark place. That
was part of Candace's point, right?
Yeah.
And she did a phenomenal job. I thought she was just awesome. And frankly, actually getting back to the question of like winning the culture war, she is an example of someone that gives me hope, right? If she can start convincing traditionally marginalized groups who have been pandered to by the left, if she can start convincing them of the values of capitalism and freedom, and she's so articulate, it's great. So the more allies, the better. And she's a great ally in this fight. I don't agree with her about everything, obviously, but what a step forward to have someone like Candace not only have come to prominence, but be able to just shut down. I mean, Ted Lieu, he's like I don't want to ad hominem too much, but he's a slime ball from California. He's constantly doing this kind of crap.
I was shocked.
Yeah. And he tried to slander her by playing a clip of comments she made in response to a question about Hitler. And then he didn't give her, he didn't play the whole thing. He didn't talk about context, and he didn't give her a chance to respond.
Yeah.
And someone else did.
He does that thing that the media does, where they try to make it sound like you're saying one thing, but you're not saying that thing. They do this all the time.
Yeah. And the left does it a lot more than the right. But we've just become way too easily outraged, and we're like, as a culture, we're just willing to take everything out of context and assume the worst about what someone could mean, right? If you said, like, I don't know, if this will probably be taken out of context. If you said, like, oh, Hitler was a good painter, I don't know if he was, but like, if you said, like, someone will be like, you're praising Hitler, you're a Nazi. Okay, he was a crappy, whatever. It doesn't matter. You're like, that'll be taken as like you support Hitler.
Right.
And that's what he was trying to do to her. And it was just, it was just despicable. It was, but it's common. And even the right does it sometimes. Like, I can't stand Ilhan Omar, for example. And I think she's probably is an anti-Semite and has a bunch of problems. But, when she criticizes foreign policy about Israel, that's not being anti-Semitic, right? And there was a thing the other day where she made comments on 9/11, and like in the context of her comments, look, I can't stand the group she was speaking to, which is CARE, which is probably a terrorist organization. I can't stand her and her politics, but in the context of what she was saying, you don't need to get outraged. She was describing that like some people of our group went and did something bad, then we were all blamed and blah, blah, blah.
Talking about 9/11.
Yeah, I don't agree with her. And was it the most like reverent way to address 9/11? No, but it's also not like so outrageous that needs to be used as an example of like how evil she is. Like, policies are evil. We don't have to talk about, like, we don't have to like get all bent out of shape because, she used a phrase that wasn't the most sympathetic. So I think, the right does do it as well a little bit, but it's mostly from the left. I would say 99 out of 100 times it's on the left, and it's crap like Ted Lieu, trying to make Candace Owens, a black woman, look like a Nazi. What an asshole.
So it's so ridiculous.
I don't mind ad hominem on Ted. What an asshole.
I thought I didn't have any shock left, but I was shocked that a congressman would do that. And I thought she handled it really well.
Yeah, she did. So this, I do want to talk about one other thing, Keri, that maybe it will be triggering for you. I don't know. It might not be, because I told people on Twitter, not that anyone paid attention, but I told some people on Twitter that I was going to address this.
Okay.
So Allie Stuckley, Allie Beth Stuckley, I really like Allie. She's a conservative millennial. I think I've seen her on Crowder and a couple other places. She did a really funny mock interview with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez a while ago.
Which again, the leftist media tried to pretend like that she was faking. Again, they assumed the word.
Right? Yeah. They were like, yeah, fake news. I'm like, yes, it was like the conservative version of, if the Daily Show was conservative, yes, the media would be like, fake news.
Yeah, she's like, it's satire, guys. Obviously, I didn't interview her. I actually had people argue with me for the longest time who didn't watch it, who just read the left news articles about it, who really believed that she was faking a news segment.
I know.
Anyway, go ahead.
You're that dumb, just shut up. But anyway, so she, Richard Dawkins tweeted something. This is how this started. Richard Dawkins tweeted something, and I'll just read his tweet. He said, "National pride has evil consequences. Prefer pride in humanity." And then he goes on, I won't read the whole thing. He goes on to say, German pride gave us Hitler, blah, 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 blah. I don't agree with Dawkins. I wasn't agreeing with Dawkins. But Allie retweeted Dawkins, and she said, "Fascinating to me when atheists use terms like evil. Equally fascinating when supposed intellectuals have such a stunning misunderstanding of history." So I didn't have a problem with her second sentence. I do think it's fascinating. I think Dawkins is brilliant in many ways, and I like him a lot, and he's retarded in many ways. And it is fascinating to me when he has such a misunderstanding. So I agreed with her about that. But as an atheist who uses the term evil often, I pushed back on her and I said, why is it fascinating that some atheists that some atheists have these a moral code with definitions of good and evil? Is it surprising to you that non-Christian religions have moral codes as well? And she went on, I'm not going to read all the tweets, but she went on to cite moral. She says moral law cannot exist without a transcendent moral lawgiver. And this whole thing then spiraled into, I stopped paying attention too much because I was actually in the car. I wasn't driving, but I was in the car with my family on a Sunday, and I wasn't going to get into a Twitter war with Allie and her followers. But over the course of the next 2 weeks, it did devolve into this ad hominem Twitter war between atheists and Christians, screaming at each other, telling them that they were idiots and trolls and Satanists and all this ludicrous stuff back and forth. But I do want to address this because, and this isn't going to be a thorough addressing of it, but I do want to mention this idea that you need so the idea that you can use, so Allie actually uses the words, where is it? She says that this is, I can't find the exact thing, but she uses the word logical. And she's, she makes this argument that it's not logical. Oh yeah. Moral law cannot logically exist without transcendent moral lawgiver. That's just a misunderstanding of what logic is completely. So she cited C.S. Lewis. The basic argument is there's a universal moral law. If there's a universal moral law, there must be a moral lawgiver. It's just like, okay. And he basically says, and then he goes on to make an argument that the lawgiver must be outside of this universe, which is also a flawed argument, I think. But his main premise is that because we all have a sense of feeling that something is good or bad, therefore there must be this universal moral law because we have a feeling of it. And that's not logical. It's not an argument to say that that's why universal law must exist. That's called evolution, right? So we can all have a feeling about something based on evolution. That's not proof that there's a universal moral law. Now you can make arguments other than that there's a universal moral law. But the fact that humans, let me even quote C.S. Lewis, human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way and cannot really get rid of it. So that's his main thing. Because we have this feeling and we all kind of feel like we shouldn't murder, therefore there is a universal law. And, my argument is we also feel like we should eat. That doesn't mean that there's a being in the sky telling us that we need to eat. We can evolve. We evolved in a society. Of course, we evolved to not kill each other in members of our society. That would not be a very good evolution strategy if we had a disagreement and just went around killing each other. So animals that are members of tribes and groups don't kill each other. They kill other tribes, but guess what? So do we. So like, I don't want to get into whether God exists or not, but it's a lazy argument to just say like, oh, well, you need God, and you can't use the word evil or good if you don't have God. If you will allow anyone who believes in any God to use the words good or evil, but not anyone who's an atheist, then your concepts of good and evil don't mean anything, right? If I believe in the flying spaghetti monster and he has a list of things that are good, and you believe in God, the Christian God, and he's got a list of things good, and someone else is a Zoroastrian, and someone else is a Scientologist, and the only thing we all have in common is that we all agree that there's some lawgiver, our definitions of good are all different, right? The Islamic Allah's definition of good is different than the Christian definition of what's good. Allah's definition of evil is different than the Christian definition of evil. Those are different things. And to say that like they can use the words good and evil, but atheists can't because they have a moral lawgiver, it doesn't make any sense. It means your concepts of good and evil aren't even, they're not even consistent. And to disallow an atheist from saying like, hey, actually, I think that you can derive universal moral law. I think that that's the job of philosophy. Not every philosopher agrees that there must be a moral lawgiver. And what happened was all the Christians immediately thought that that meant moral relativism. And I'm not arguing for moral relativism. I don't agree with moral relativism, but that doesn't mean that philosophy can't try and figure out, which I think is the job of philosophy, what are universal ethics? And I'm not saying it's an easy job, but the fact that it's hard doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I don't know. That's kind of a rant. It wasn't the best rant in the world. But Keri, you want to hate on me for that as a Christian?
No, I don't really have any comments on that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you disagree with me about something?
I don't have any strong, I don't know. I don't really.
You don't care.
No, I don't care. I'm sorry.
Well, sorry for wasting everyone's time.
No, you don't waste everyone's time. It's just people get passionate about different things. I'm not very passionate about that one way or the other. I think anybody obviously can use the terms evil and good. I do believe in a moral rule giver. And
no, I know you do. That's and I get that.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be rude. I just don't have anything to say.
Right. No. I mean, that's the I don't know. To me, it's just it's weird that people that assume that like it's also another false dichotomy, right? Either you believe in a moral lawgiver or there's moral relativism. Like that's a false dichotomy. That's not the proof. Those aren't the only two alternatives. Right. So, and actually Keith,
I agree with that.
Keith, who says this in chat, he says, this is called the divine fallacy. Quote, and this is a quote, I don't understand how this happened or why ethics exist. Therefore, there is one true God who created everything and defines all morals. Yes, Keith, that is the divine fallacy. And I don't want to get into an argument about whether there's a God or not, but you know what? I love Allie. She's great. I'm going to continue to use the terms good and evil. I have a right to use the terms good and evil. I actually think I have more of a right than she does to use them because I know why things are good and evil. I've derived them, not so single-handedly, but yeah. Anyway, all right. So that's that. We can move on. Keri doesn't care.
Sorry.
Keri, tell us about the religious. Speaking about religion. Oh wait, should we do your bill in Texas or should we do Julian Assange? Because I want to talk about Julian.
No, let's not do Julian. I don't really care about that. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. I hate. I want to. No, I'd like to talk about. Well, if you want me to talk about something religious, I mean, I know we've talked about this before. I'm really fascinated with my old ideology moving into the church, And
Oh,
at some point, we're going to do a whole episode about this. We just got to find the right guest for it. I really liked the conversation we had with Dr. J.R. Mueller, but that was more specifically about racism. And I think we could do an even broader, just about what the changes that have been happening in different denominations. So I'm a very new Christian, as maybe people who listen know. I don't even like to, I'm always afraid I'm going to misrepresent Christianity. So I'm like, I don't want to talk about it too much because I'm a broken person, right? But that's what Christianity is about broken people trying to become more like the ideal, which is Jesus. Anyway, this is why I don't talk about it, because I'm afraid I'll say something wrong. but I do know some things in my gut, right? And one of these things is I saw these Christian thought leaders online recently sharing some of these SJW tenets. And like one of them shared that Kyle Korver piece that we talked about at the beginning. And he was sort of like, hey, white Christians, this is those of you who ask what you want from us, this is a good start. You should do this, right? And link that piece. And I think that's so sick. I think it's wrong. It's elevating a different ideology above the word of God. Like in the church, it's just like any other convergence that takes place. Like when SJWs converge at Google, spreading the ideology becomes primary, doing Google stuff becomes secondary, right? Everything's filtered through the ideology. It's the same if any organization, whether it's a company, if it's your after school club, it doesn't matter what if it's a school, if it's a church, convergence is when the ideology becomes primary. And so I think to say that people have to filter everything through this belief system is subverting the word of God. And it's putting other text above the word of God. It's putting all this stuff about toxic masculinity and whiteness and, privilege. And it's making that the primary text and lens through which you view everything else. And it makes me very sad. Like
God became woke.
Yes, God became woke. I joined, if anything, Jesus was about individualism in that everyone is equal in the eyes of God, slave and master. Do you know what I mean? It's not, he wasn't preaching about collectivism. He wasn't talking about like, let's judge people based on their race and sex, and let's group people into these groups, and then we'll figure out who gets to talk and who doesn't get to talk, and based on what amount of privilege they have. None of that is Christian. So right. It really makes me sad because I'm like, I joined, hold on. Sorry, guys. I became a Christian. That was my old religion. Do you know what I mean? To see that religion now, that cultish SJW stuff seeping into different denominations. Yeah, it makes me sad and also righteously furious. So,
you can't leave. It's following you.
It's following me. Yeah. But then it also, it makes me think, well, maybe that is so Christians believe every person has a purpose and everyone's purpose is different. This goes back to the idea of you may not agree with everything Candace Owens says, for example, or everything Megan Murphy says, but everyone's got a different gift and they're using that gift to glorify God. Well, you don't have to be a Christian to believe that. You can just say like in this culture war, everyone's got a different gift or different talent or different purpose. And you don't all have to be on the same, because everyone's talking to a different community perhaps. Right. So, maybe my gift is because I know I came from this background, this ideology. Maybe my purpose is to figure out how to talk about it in the context of it creeping into the church.
Yeah. I mean, you and I were talking about this yesterday a little bit, Keri. My impression I'm kind of an outsider to Christianity in the sense that I'm an atheist, but I grew up extremely conservative. I've read the Bible like 6 or 7 times, cover to cover. And so I'm not unfamiliar with Christianity. And I think what's happened culturally is that the church used to be a cultural leader, and people would turn to the church for advice and kind of just general cultural guidance. And what's happened to the church, I don't know when this started happening. I mean, it's probably started decades and decades ago. But at this point, the church really is a follower of culture now more than a leader. People, if you look at like attendance rates at a lot of churches, I mean, there was an article I saw where someone was theorizing that, I don't know if you shared it, Keri, or not, but like the reason the Episcopalian Church sanctioned gay marriage was because like marriages in the Episcopalian Church had like fallen off massively and were zero, and they're like, well, we need someone to marry. So I think what's happened is there's been an abandonment of turning to the church for any kind of cultural leadership, and church leaders, I think, are probably feeling the need to follow culture rather than the other way around. And again, I'm saying this as an atheist, but that's not your job as a church leader. Like, if you're going to believe in something and you think that that's metaphysically true, and especially if you're like Ali Stuckley, who's like, hey, there's a universal moral law and this is the lawgiver, that should be your priority. Take it seriously. Either take it seriously or don't be a Christian. You want to not be a Christian, I can talk to you about that. You want to take it seriously, maybe Keri can talk to you about that. But like, at least take the ideas seriously. Ideas matter. And so you're not, if you're like in a church not actually being a Christian, you're not like, and you're, social justice is more important, then you're not a Christian.
And like, what's the point of being there? Just go be,
yeah.
go be, do your social justice religion elsewhere. I don't know. I sound kind of, I think I'm becoming really conservative in some ways. I'm not a conservative. I'm very liberal in a lot of ways as well, but I am becoming, I guess, more of a traditionalist in that regard, because I'm like, yeah, if you're going to do it right. Don't try and filter it through the modern culture.
Yeah. So Keith just said, is religion now downstream from culture? So this is that's actually a fascinating question. I think it is, but I think that's partly because, okay, so I have to go off on a tangent for a second.
Please do.
I think there's, so ultimately, I think it's the flow goes philosophy flows to culture flows to politics, right? So, and most people don't pay attention to philosophy, so it's easy for the evil philosophers to get their hooks in culture, because they do it through the universities and kind of elite channels that not everyone is paying attention to, and before you know it, every movie out of Hollywood vilifies the big business owner and praises politicians or whatever it is, right? And that affects culture, therefore, and then eventually politics. Religion is weird because, and maybe Keri will disagree with me on this, but I think religion is a substitute for philosophy. So, and maybe some religious people would argue that religion is philosophy. I would argue that religion is a substitute for philosophy, but it doesn't. Either way, it's typically upstream of culture. But I think nihilism has won philosophically, and so our culture is nihilistic, and so religion has been, how do I want to say this? Yeah, religion is struggling to regain its status as as being upstream of culture, but I think it's not upstream of culture anymore, because the kind of nihilism kind of won philosophically. And so the problem with nihilism is that it's not, I mean, there's a lot of problems with nihilism. Other philosophies could win and kind of take over culture. Like, for example, or let's even pick another religion. Islam could kind of win philosophically or religiously and then flow into a culture, and you would have Islamic culture and therefore Islamic law. To pick another example, you could have just one that I'm familiar with. You could pick like objectivism, like any philosophy. You could pick objectivism, and like that could win at the philosophical level, and it would bleed into culture, and then culture would bleed into politics, and that would flow. Nihilism is different because nihilism is kind of anti-philosophy. So nihilism is really the destruction of any philosophy, which means we're kind of being we don't really have philosophic drivers right now, other than this constant battle to destroy any philosophic drivers from the nihilists. So I feel like we're kind of culturally like this ship being tossed about in the ocean, and so the church is just trying to kind of like react to like, well, where are things going? I need to like get people on board, and there's no one driving culture. If there was a different philosophy driving culture, the church could take a stance against that, right? And say like, oh no, we're this different philosophy. But there isn't really a philosophy driving. It's nihilism, and it's kind of one. So we're kind of a mess. Someone needs to take a stand. And I think the churches that do take a stand will probably end up being more successful in the long term, as will any philosophy that takes a stand, which is why, for example, I think Islam is a threat, because Islam takes a stand against nihilism. And that's more attractive than nihilism, as horrible as Islam is. If Christianity were to take a stand against nihilism, that would be better. I would rather have like a rational, objectivist style philosophy take a stand against nihilism and win. To me, that would be even better. But I don't know. That's just kind of off the top of my head. That's my answer to your question, Keith.
I think that's really interesting what you said about Islam taking a stand. I've seen a couple of other people point that out as well. It's like I think, is it in the UK where these Muslim parents banded together and got the public, like the elementary school, to root out the transgender stuff that they were teaching. And I saw some people kind of commenting, wow, like, look, these Islamic parents were able to do what the Christian parents were not, which was to say, no, you're not going to be teaching that to my children. So I don't know. That's kind of
prefer consistent adherence to principles over inconsistent adherence to non-principles.
Yes.
Like, so that's the thing. If someone is offering consistent adherence to rational principles as an alternative and they're sticking by that, that's more attractive than Islam. But if no one's offering that, well, consistency like to something is more attractive to people generally. I'm not saying it's right. It's just more attractive. And so I, even as an atheist, would much rather the Christian churches in the West take a freaking stand and exhibit some sort of principled alternative, because frankly, it's much easier to live as an atheist under a Christian capitalist, individualist society than it is to live in Islam.
Yeah. That's a fascinating point, though. I want to think about that some more.
Yeah. That's all at the top of my head, too. I didn't really think too deep. Okay, can we talk about Julian Assange?
Please.
Does anyone not want us to talk about it? I mean, there's a few people in chat. I want to talk about Julian Assange. If no one wants to talk about Julian Assange, we don't have to. But I want to talk about Julian Assange. And if Keri does, we're going to talk about it.
Go right ahead, sir.
So everyone knows who he is. He's the founder of WikiLeaks. So what happened today? The news today on Julian Assange is that he's been extradited. I guess the U.S. I don't know if it was the U.S. agents or the U.K. agents. Someone snagged him out of the Ecuadorian embassy and is bringing him back. He has been charged. I have the indictment with conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. And I read the charges against him. Actually, there's one charge, one count of conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. It's a pretty short document. Where do I begin with Assange? First of all, he's not a U.S. citizen. Let's lay some facts out. So what he's in trouble for is Chelsea Manning, formerly Bradley Manning, who, remember, if people remember, Bradley Manning was the person who released a bunch of classified information, sent it to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks published it. He was in the military. I don't remember. She now, I guess, was in the military. I don't remember what branch she was in, but Navy. My dig at Navy people is probably the Navy, because she had a sex change. I
don't know what that dig means, but go right ahead.
I used to work with people in the military. Although Keith, actually, you worked with the Navy as well. So anyway, she released information through WikiLeaks, which was classified. And what they're charging is that at some point during this process, Julian, I guess, offered to help crack a password. Never actually did crack the password. Just like offered to help and said it wasn't making any progress on it. And also kind of like, I guess, incited Chelsea to release the documents. Like, so it was, telling her, yeah, we'll release it and you should get more information for us. Now, there's a couple interesting things to me about this whole thing. First of all, let me just say, I think Julian Assange should be pardoned. I don't think he should be charged in the first place. I don't see anything wrong with what Julian Assange did. There may not even be, I'm not a lawyer. There's not a lot legally wrong with what he did. There may be some kind of thing. I mean, this is a pretty weak charge. Conspiracy to commit computer intrusion is a pretty weak charge, let's admit. But even if there's something that he's done that legally is wrong, morally, I don't think he's done anything wrong. However, for the past 2 years, all these Trump collusion Russia people, Rachel Maddow and everyone else has been yelling about how Trump is still conspiring with Julian Assange. They're in cahoots together to cover this up and to do this. And they were in cahoots on the Russia thing. It turns out that we now know, as of today, that for the past 2 years, the Trump Department of Justice has been trying to extradite Julian Assange so they could charge him with shit. So not exactly the best of friends. Kind of blows up another conspiracy theory from the left about Trump's campaign and Trump in bed with people that he's not in bed with. I guess they're right about Stormy Daniels, but not much else. So he's been after Assange, as it turns out. So Assange has now been extradited for this one charge, conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. And I just want to explain how this works from why my perspective is that Julian Assange hasn't done anything wrong. Chelsea Manning had a top secret clearance. Now, I've had a top secret clearance. Keith has had at least a secret clearance, maybe a top secret clearance. I don't know, Keith. I don't want to reveal. Keith is in the chat here, so I'm talking to him live. I've had a top secret clearance. I had a top secret compartmentalized clearance.
Am I the only one who's never had a top secret clearance?
Apparently. I had to sign a document agreeing to protect information. So if I were to leak information, you could rightly charge me with violating my promise. I made a promise to the United States to not release information. So did Keith. So did anyone else who signed a document like that. So I've signed a document saying I won't release this information. You haven't, Keri. Neither have journalists, neither have reporters from the New York Times, which is why when classified information gets leaked, they could publish it because they didn't sign this document. Mm-hmm. They didn't say, hey, I promise to keep this secret. Now, the person who leaked it will get in trouble and should, but
the journalist should not. I hear what you're saying. That's freedom of the press.
To make matters worse, Julian Assange is not an American citizen. He's not a citizen of the United States. He didn't do this in the United States. He is he's outside of the jurisdiction of the U.S. They admit that he did this stuff while he was outside of the jurisdiction. It's a weak charge in the first place. And their argument is, well, because he's not a U.S. citizen, he doesn't have rights as a U.S. citizen, and therefore we're going to charge him with this thing related to publishing stuff that someone else violated the law to get. It's pretty abhorrent to me. And the thing that I've been thinking about this, obviously I understand that governments need to have some information secret if you're going to have governments. And my anarchy notwithstanding, if you're going to have a government, it needs to have secret information, especially military related information. However, it seems like if that information reveals, if information is revealed that shouldn't have been revealed, but that turns out to demonstrate that what the government agencies or organizations were doing was actually unconstitutional and illegal, Edward Snowden being an example of someone who's released material like this. Seems like that should be enough to be forgiven, right? So you need to have some protection for people who reveal things that are illegal. Now, I don't know that Chelsea revealed things that were illegal. I don't remember exactly what was released, but this whole thing's getting me think of Edward Snowden as well. And like, if a government is allowed to have secrets, okay, but it seems like whistleblowers who reveal illegal activity should be protected, right? It shouldn't be, it should be like, yeah, you can't release any of our information unless it turns out we're doing something illegal, and then you can, and you can't be charged. So, because there needs to be some kind of checks and balances here. And obviously FISA courts, as we've learned, aren't really a great check and balance for what governments can and can't do. So I don't understand the argument for going after Julian Assange here. If anyone in the chat wants to go after Julian Assange, I'd love to hear the argument for it. As far as I can see, the argument for going after Julian is like patriotism, which is not an argument, right? I don't like, he published stuff. Like, yeah, so what? He published stuff. Big deal. He didn't get it, right?
Well,
even if he helped crack it, he never signed any documents saying he wouldn't do that. Keri.
Well, my only comment on this is that I don't have a lot of thoughts on it other than that Trump is probably feeling the pressure to prosecute now, right? Because of what you said, there's been this allegation, this idea that he's somehow in cahoots with Assange. So what better way to show he's not than to prosecute? So, but I agree with you. I don't think he did anything wrong. So, yeah.
Yeah. So Keith says he'll likely be tried in Eastern Virginia Federal Court District, a jury of federal employees and families. Oh, yeah, great. It is and then he says it's a kangaroo court. Yeah, I think you're probably right. His peers, what's going to be considered as a jury of his peers is a bunch of CIA and FBI and DOD employees, right? Right. And as Keith points out, his peers are actually Australian, which is true. His peers. But I don't know if he has a right to a trial by jury of his peers because he's not an American citizen. I think their argument, I don't know what the argument is here. I don't really understand how you can pull someone out of a foreign country, extradite them, and charge them for committing crimes against U.S. law. They weren't even on U.S. soil during commission of those crimes. It's pretty weak, but apparently that's where we are now. So I don't know. Maybe on his way out, Trump will pardon Assange. He certainly should. But yeah, Keith, the government does not want citizens to know what they're doing. Yeah, and he didn't. That's the other thing. He didn't publish anything false. Everything he published was true. So there we are. There we are with Julian Assange getting extradited. It's a shame. I don't know what we're gonna do. I think we've kind of I've run out of my list of things. I mean, I didn't get into some of the stuff as much as I wanted to. Like, I was hoping to have a longer discussion about the Allie Beth Stuckley thing, but you just didn't care. So that's fine. Want to talk about anything else you want to talk about, Keri? Are we good? Anyone wants to talk about it? We can end the show. It's an hour and a half in. There's no shame in ending the show now, but I want to touch on anything and everything. We will have a guest back next week, I think. But we just really wanted to have a week where it was just us. We got to get caught up on things. There's been a lot of people really want to, by the way, Keri, if you're not paying attention to the chat, people really do want to talk about the SJW intrusion into churches. So we should find someone and get them on the show.
I really want to talk about that. Yeah.
Working on it, but let's, we'll bump it up priority wise. So
yeah.
So there you have it.
Well, speaking of religious, there's the one other thing I'll just say is that religious liberty bill here in Texas. This is just an example of the way that I see propaganda spread, and it was fascinating to me to watch it. I had a friend who is not here in Texas, but who shared something about how Texas just passed or is about to pass a bill that would allow psychologists to discriminate against gays and lesbians and not treat them. And yeah, and I looked into the bill, and it's a really short bill. It's like a page and a half, and it's it's a religious liberty bill. And it's basically saying that the government, the state, cannot take away your license if you're a licensed professional, whether you're a doctor or cosmetologist or whatever. They can't take away your license or refuse to give you your license because of a deeply held religious belief, which I actually support. I think that's a great idea. And there's nothing in the bill about there's nothing in the bill about psychologists specifically or LGBT, but a lot of groups, SJW groups, have put out, of course, their talking points about it. And so I think my friend was just sharing the talking points. But when you actually look at the bill, I was like, so what do you what exactly do you have issue with here? Because, and so she quoted something that had section B. So it looked like it was in the bill, but it's not. She was quoting propaganda. She quoted a sentence that's not even in there. That people on her wall, of course, it's how fake news spreads. People on her wall, of course, are like, that's horrible. Texas is horrible, blah, blah, and they're not going to read the bill. They're not going to read the articles. Right. They're just going to believe this is happening. And then they're going to go and tell people. And that's the way propaganda works. So it just really kind of upset me because I think when you look at it, I even asked her, I was like, so do you I don't think that a Christian baker should be forced to bake a cake to provide a service for a gay wedding if it goes against his beliefs, gay marriage, right? Any more than I believe there's that Muslim woman it's the transgender woman who's suing a Muslim woman for refusing to wax her genitals at the salon. Because the Muslim woman, and it doesn't matter.
Genitals are a penis. Let's just be clear.
Oh yeah. And you know what? Take trans out of it. The Muslim woman, if it were just like a man, her religion would state that she should not be performing that service on a man. And so I don't think it's right for the state to step in and say, you will perform this service. I think that
you must look at this man's genitals and wax his balls.
Yeah. Or you, and I think that's just so backwards. And so I was trying to have a conversation with her about it, but she's sort of new to SJW ideology. And so she was sort of throwing out some of the standard stuff I'm used to hearing, which is about lived experience. And what, if you guys hear that, that's a buzzword they use, like my lived experience.
What does lived experience mean other than like you lived and had experiences like everyone else?
It just means you can't disagree with me because I'm a member of this particular marginalized group.
Oh, I see.
And they elevate lived experience above any facts or reason or logic. So,
well, logic is the white man's tool.
Right. But so I was like, do you think that the Muslim woman should be forced to do that? Do you think the cake baker should be forced to do that? And do you think like a doctor who's against abortion should be forced to perform an abortion if his religion states otherwise? Like, I don't agree with that. And I don't know what it's like in 2019 in her state. But in Texas, it's not like there's people out here just salivating at the chance to find a loophole to, discriminate against gays. And, I can't wait until this bill passes so I can refuse to serve gay. It's not like this is a huge thing. It's actually just, it's a bill to protect people's rights. Right.
Wait, I want to interrupt because Keith is pointing out something that I agree with.
What?
He says, deeply held religious beliefs should not confer special rights than the rest of us don't have. So if it's not a right, so if so, it's not a right. So no religious belief should be considered a valid argument in U.S. court, which I agree with. Although I also kind of agree with you, but not completely, Keri. You and I talked about this yesterday. I want to throw that out there. I want to throw out the idea that may be unpopular, but you should be allowed to discriminate for any reason whatsoever. It's none of the government's business why you're not waxing someone's balls. It can be because you're a racist bigot. It can be because you have religious beliefs. It be because you don't like the color of their shirt because you don't want to. It doesn't matter. Whenever you have, at the end of every government regulation is a gun. That's why it's the government. You are forced by force to do it, or you go to jail. That's what a law is. That's what a regulation is. And people need to understand that. So are you an asshole bigot if you say, I don't want black people to come in my restaurant? Yeah, absolutely you are. Should you be allowed to do that? Absolutely. Should you be subject to social pressure in your community that where no one goes to your restaurant and calls you a racist? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I will also jump on board and call you a racist and tell people not to go to your restaurant. But should the government force you? No. And there's a huge difference here. And we've got a generation of people who have been raised to believe that instead of social pressure, laws should be passed. And that is extremely dangerous, because you're going to get into these situations where, like, sorry, Muslim lady, got to shave his balls or whatever it is she's supposed to be doing.
Well, I actually, I think I agree with that for the most part. I have to think about it some more, but the other thing about this is, and I was saying to her, because she was saying, well, like a psychologist should have to treat a gay person. I'm like, why would you want? Okay, let's say there's a psychologist who doesn't want to treat a gay person, either because they're prejudiced or because they have a real concern that they're not going to give that person the best help possible because of their views, their religious views. Isn't that horrible for the gay person to force them for that therapist to have to treat them? Like, maybe the gay person should keep looking and find someone who doesn't either hold that prejudice or have that religious belief that they're going to filter everything through. Like, it doesn't help the person you claim it's helping, No. So you know what, if somebody doesn't want to bake a wedding cake for me, and they're forced to, I'm going to be afraid about what they put in the cake. Like, they might spit in it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want them to have to make the cake. Like, I'll find somebody who wants to make the cake.
At the end of the day, right? If any kind of discrimination like that is outlawed, and I'm talking about public institutions, I'm talking about private people, private institutions. If any discrimination is outlawed, that is outlawing it. You have to, it presupposes you understand thoughts. Right? You can't. So if you say, like, oh, you refused to serve this black person the hamburger. Well, now you have to decide, like, did I do it because that's the guy who shot up my car the other day, or because I don't like him for some other reason, or because I was out of hamburgers, or because whatever, or did I do it because I'm a racist bigot? Right? Mm-hmm. And now you got to get in my head and you got to figure out, like, well, did he give the last hamburger to the white guy first, knowing that the black guy wanted one? Or, like, now you've got to, like, get into my brain and make determinations about my thought process. And any law that tries to outlaw some form of discrimination it presupposes that you have the ability to enter someone's brain and decide what it is that they're
right.
This is how they're making their decisions. Right. And granted, there's some obvious cases. If you have a restaurant and you have a sign that says no black people allowed, well, obviously you're probably, obviously it's a racist thing, right?
And you're doing that because of race.
Sure. But, in general, you have to, that's because I'm telling you my thought process with my sign in my window. Right. But, this idea that, like, I don't know. I want society to move forward. And to do that, we have to exert social pressure, not have laws, because laws just backfire. Like, laws backfire. Laws presuppose that you understand people's thought process. And, laws are force. And it's not better. If someone's a bigot, you're not morally superior because you force them back gunpoint to serve someone they hate.
By the way, Laura in chat just continue with this train of thought about it being not better for the person who's getting the service. She's like, if someone doesn't want to wax your balls, you really should move along. Things won't end well.
Laura, you are completely correct.
Yeah, I don't want that person waxing me.
Yeah,
they don't want to.
Oops, I used the wrong wax, or whatever it is.
Like, imagine if you force a hairdresser to give you. Yeah, I don't want you doing my hair. You're gonna mess it up. You don't want to.
Yeah, yeah. So it's this whole idea. It's this whole idea of having the government treat people like groups and police people and force them to, either hire or perform services for or whatever. It never ends well. It's always immoral, even if the other person is immoral, even if it's a racist bigot and you're preventing them from being a racist bigot or from manifesting that behavior in some way, you're still doing it at gunpoint. That doesn't make you better. And you know what? Racist bigots should be shunned and socially ostracized, and no one should go to their hamburger joints or whatever it is. And if these waxing people really are somehow discriminating against people in a way that society thinks is bad, then don't frequent their establishments. right?
Exactly. And tell your friends not to frequent,
Right. And if your friends all look at you and go, dude, you got balls. Of course she's not going to wax them. Well, then you're going to have to learn to wax your own, quote, female parts.
Find somebody who will. There's plenty of people. It's like that guy who was harassing Meghan Murphy or got into the tangle with Meghan Murphy. He's got 16 open lawsuits where he's specifically going out this trans woman. And I will not use his pronoun. It's up to me when I use it. Most of the time I do, but not with him, because I think he's disgusting. And I think what he's doing, trying to do to her and to working women is disgusting. He's out there purposefully looking for women who have an objection to doing male genitals so that he can sue. He's a grifter.
Yep.
The con man.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he's hurting working class women.
Yeah, and doesn't he have a history of doing lawsuits not just for this, like any other stuff too, just frivolous lawsuits,
slip and fall lawsuits, all that stuff. Con man.
Yeah, totally a con man. And I think it's fine. You don't have to use his preferred pronoun. Chelsea Manning, I don't mind saying she. I don't think she's.
Oh yeah, I don't mind saying she, and it depends on the person. That's the whole thing about it. Is like, look, whenever people get into the pronoun thing with me and they're like, oh, but why is it so hard for you to be polite? I'm like, it's not. That's the whole point. And if this person deserves politeness and respect, then they'll get it from me, but it's my choice on an individual basis. It shouldn't be up to the law forcing me to do that. So that's my thoughts on that, Carter. That's a final rant.
All right, go rant. So I think we've touched on everything at this point. We did the religious liberty bill. Let me look through my list. I think we touched on everything. It's, you know what, Keri, I really feel like we needed to wait. Miranda Yardley offered to personally. I don't know who that is. Who's Miranda Yardley?
I know that name.
I imagine this is funny because it says Miranda Yardley personally offered to wax his balls. I
don't know what that means, but okay. We'll look it up.
My guess is it's someone who he would not want waxing his balls.
Okay.
That's just my theory on that one. Anyway, look, Keri, this was really good. I think we really needed to get caught up just kind of with our community and with each other, talking about a bunch of stuff instead of interviewing people. We'll bring back interviews next week, but thank you for doing this, and thank everyone else for getting us to 500. Our next goal is 1,000 YouTube subscribers. So let's get there. Once we have 1,000, I don't know. I think it unlocks something in. It'll
unlock an achievement award. So everyone, we're not. I mean, we have a Patreon. We're just not pushing it yet. We will at some point be asking for people to support us soon, right? But what you can do in the meantime, if you want to support, is definitely just share the videos if you can, or like them, or whatever. Give us those metrics.
Yeah, and if you go to unsafespace.com, you can. There's a link to the Patreon. There's a link to actually you can send us Bitcoin and Ether as well to support us if you're that kind of person. But right now it's liking and sharing.
You can send me dog biscuits.
You can send Keri dog biscuits. You can send someone to watch the dogs during the show on Thursdays.
How about that?
So that would also be great. But thank you everyone for joining and for supporting us so much. Sorry, I'm just mucking with also producer. Anyone who wants to be a free producer, come on over. So anyway, thank you for joining. Thank you for watching the show. Please like, share, do all that kind of stuff. And we will see you all next week. Take care.